Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for tuning in for tonight's Bible study. We're so grateful for you being willing to take some time to join us for these daily devotionals and for our studies, as we have been trying to provide something on Sunday and Wednesday night for you to study along with, and hopefully those things have been beneficial to you and to your family. And we're certainly thankful for the time we had this morning in Bible study and in worship, and pray that that was uplifting and encouraging for you. Before we get started with our class tonight, we ask our 3rd through 6th graders, we try to ask them a question each and every time. What do you know about, and this time it's about the Exodus. What are 3 things that you know about the Exodus? So have your kids go check out the book of Exodus and see if they can hunt down 3 things, maybe perhaps that they haven't noticed before, or maybe 3 things that they learned the last time it was covered in a class that they were in. So what are 3 things you know about the Exodus? As we get started, we have been talking about Christian evidences for the last week or so. We want to continue that study tonight and hope that this will be of benefit to you. Last time we talked about the design argument, and we made some points about how when you go into a discussion with someone, a lot of times it's not going to be clear cut. It's not going to be them saying, I don't believe in God, and you saying that you believe in God, and therefore you both kind of have your rules and your things to follow, and the argument sort of goes the way that the books say that it should go. A lot of times it's going to be maybe somebody who is having some doubts, and maybe you just need some evidence to show them that what they believed in the outset they can believe now. Maybe your discussion might be with someone who does say they don't really know if they believe whether God exists or not. They don't really know. They don't have any idea. They've never studied it. They've never looked at it. They don't know. So maybe it won't be so clear and dry, but we talked about how the design argument is a great way for you to invest some time in another person, in another soul, in another conversation. It's a great way to lead them towards God without necessarily being accused of being stuck in your ways and refusing to listen. The design argument's a great logical, rational discussion to have with someone, to point out to them that we know a lot of things naturally occur in this world. Well, how does that happen without a design or without someone to purpose it? And that was sort of our focus in our last study. So this week, what we kind of want to do, and again, let's review very quickly the importance of this question. Why is it important to study the existence of God? God is the being greater than anything that can be imagined or thought of. It's foundational to the order of being. Again, that goes into the design argument that we discussed in our last study, the idea that basically you can't have a functioning world or a functioning universe without a designer. Things have to have been put in a particular place for a purpose. And for that to happen, there had to be something, some kind of force to put those in a specific location. And truthfully, without going too far off track here, for those who maybe are leaning towards the Big Bang Theory, the next time you have the ability to shoot a firecracker, go out and shoot a firecracker and see if when you shoot the firecracker, it actually turns into some sort of fully functioning device after it explodes. The likelihood of that happening is just impossible. And therefore, I mean, how could you at any point think that a huge explosion would place things so perfectly, so specifically in the order in which they are? How could you believe? How could you look at that and think that an explosion could do that? And I've said this before, and I don't mean it to be a joke. I actually mean it to be quite serious, but it takes far more faith to be an atheist. It takes far more faith to buy into the Big Bang Theory than it does to buy into God, and God being the creator of the universe and the sustainer of the universe. It takes far more faith to buy into those kinds of suggestions than it does to buy into a designer, a purposer of things. So that's the importance of this question. So here's what we want to do. We want to give you a couple of different options that are out there, the ideas that are out there, not options necessarily for you to believe in, but things that are kind of out there in our world that people may bring up. There's 2 major, really, really big ones that we want to cover. But we start with this question, the idea of creation. The story just seems like that. It just seems like a story. So how in the world are you expecting me to believe and buy into that there was this infinite being of long ago, this eternal being of long ago, who just decided one day to up and make something. You see, when you present it that way, and that's how it's going to be presented to you by the opposing side, is that this is just nothing more than a make-believe fairy tale story, and that cannot be your approach. You cannot be led into that direction. Bottom line is, you and I can know for sure that man was created by God. But that does not say that there isn't in existence other ideas or thoughts or created things by man in an effort to do away with the idea of creation and to do away with the idea of a God, of a being, of a deity bringing about the universe. So let's look at a couple of those, and we're kind of going to look at these sort of specifically in this particular study. The first one goes by the name of atheistic evolution. Atheistic evolution. Now, this would be just a very succinct definition. Evolution occurred by mere chance. Now, the idea behind this is it totally removes God from the process. It takes the idea, the God quotient, it takes the God character, if you will, away from the creation of the universe, away from the creation of the world, away from the sustaining peace of this world and universe, etc. It allows for those who don't want to buy into an eternal being, it allows them a way to get to present day where we are right now, May the 10th, 2020, without God. It allows them to get there. The issue with atheistic evolution, the idea of evolution occurring by mere chance, number one, first and foremost, we've already covered. The idea that something exploded and all of a sudden pieces fell perfectly into place is very difficult to grasp. But secondarily, if you are to accept this idea, then you and I, we have to accept things that simply we just cannot believe. This has nothing to do necessarily with religion in a broad brush sort of way. This is just simple rationality. This is simple logic. Okay, so let's look at some of those things. To accept atheistic evolution, you and I would have to believe. It's a must. It's not. There is no negotiation here. You have to believe first and foremost that matter is eternal. Or if it's not eternal, if you're not comfortable with saying that matter is eternal, then you have to be okay with saying that matter came into being from absolutely nothing. And you have to be okay with saying that life came from non-living matter. Now, I want you to think about those two things together, those two ideas together. First and foremost, is matter eternal? Have you ever had something, a man-made something, that right now is in the exact same condition as it was let's say 1,000 years ago? Let's just use a little drop in the bucket, because if you remember, we spoke about this not too long ago. We're upwards of 16, 17, 18, maybe 20 billion years needed to sort of fit all of this in. So let's just use a little drop in the bucket. Is there something right now that looks the exact same as it did 1,000 years ago? Okay, let's say there is something. Well, let's go backwards and say, does it look the exact same as it did 5,000 years ago? What about 10,000 years ago? What about 100,000 years ago? Let's say that what if there was something that looks the exact same as it did 1,000 years ago? Does it look the exact same as it did 100,000 years ago? Well, the answer in every single thing that involves matter is no, it can't. There's no way that there's anything out there that could possibly look the exact same from right now backwards 100,000 years. So therefore, you're already in the hole, as it were, if you're going to argue this, because we're proving right away that matter's not eternal. Matter's not eternal. Anything and everything that you ever have had or will have or used to have or have currently, it is changing in every possible way, every possible day. Think about your home, the home that you live in. It could be a brand new home. I mean, nobody's ever even stepped foot in it after it was finished. It's just brand new. It's the first step you've taken into it. Within just a couple of weeks, you'll be up at night watching television and you'll start hearing some weird noises. And what do you look at your spouse and say? That's the house settling. Well, immediately when you say that, what you're acknowledging is the house is now different than it was before someone took a step in it. If you drive a brand new car off the lot, it has, 1 mile on it when you get into it, and you drive it out onto the road, immediately the tires have changed, even just from the parking lot to the road. It might not be able to be seen with the naked eye, but it has changed. The wear on those tires has changed. So that truck or that car that you just bought has changed. Everything that we have, we understand that it changes over time. So if you can't be okay, or you can't prove that matter is eternal, then you have to accept the other side, which is matter came from nothing. Now, if you remember, we talked about Stephen Hawking in his book, The Grand Design, acknowledged that I guess you would say, the initial particle or the initial piece of matter that began life those billions and billions of years ago had to have come from nothing. It had to have spontaneously arrived. And if you remember, then we acknowledged the fact that the scary thing is scientists see that, and they even said, if you remember, that's how we closed our lesson I believe it was last Sunday night, as a matter of fact. Scientists have finally said, okay, it could not have come by natural occurrences. It had to have spontaneously appeared by supernatural occurrences. And we said that's the first piece of true scientific evidence that they've put forth. So you cannot believe that matter came into being from nothing unless you're willing to accept spontaneous supernatural appearing. And if that's the case, then I have a better argument. If you accept supernatural spontaneous appearing, then you and we finally have some ground that we can operate off of, because I firmly believe in supernatural spontaneous appearing. I believe that God said, "Let there be light," and there was light. And out of nothing came something, but I believe it was done by a designer. Secondarily, how could someone accept that life came from non-living matter? And next time you have an opportunity to do so, go out in your backyard, take a rock, and I want you just to set that rock on your back porch. And I want you to come back to that rock once a week. And I want you to see if it's gotten up and walked off. I want you to see if, like, out of the side of the rock comes a little baby rock, and that little baby rock starts walking around on your back porch. I want you to take a stick, and I want you to stick it in the ground. And I want you to come back to it from time to time, and I want you just to see if that dead piece of wood that you stuck in the ground, I want you to see if all of a sudden, like, little baby sticks get up and start running around. Life cannot come from non-living matter. It doesn't work that way. Thirdly, man's conscience would, if I'm going to accept atheistic evolution, I have to accept the fact. I have to believe that man's conscience is just the result of evolution. I have no proof that man had a conscience when he was early man. If I accept atheistic evolution, the early man had no conscience whatsoever, and the conscience is just a result of evolution. Now, the scary thing about that, and the part that you really have to be concerned about, is if that's the case, then everything that you know to be right or wrong is relative. There is no such thing as an absolute right or wrong. This is just simply the process of evolution. And who's to say that in 10 years it won't be okay for us to murder everyone? I know that's an extreme. I get that that's an extreme. I readily accept that is an extreme. But here's the truth. If man's conscience is just simply the result of evolution, then who's to say that in 50 years, 100 years, 20 years, 10 years, our morals haven't completely and totally changed, and the things that we would have never thought were okay would be accepted and would be embraced by law enforcement, would be embraced by the rules and regulations of our society? And I know what you're doing. I know what you're thinking. Some of you are sitting there thinking, well, that's kind of happening already, Scott. No. I know that you're thinking that, and I had the thought too, because you think about some of the things that are being pushed through and forced through in our government today, and we say, that's what's happening. We're spiraling out of control, and we're allowing things that we would have never thought possible. I understand that, but at the heart of all that, there's still a conscience. There's still a moral reasoning, and we can explain where it came from as Christians. We say, well, it's a God thing. We understand it. God gave rules and regulations of how he wanted to be followed. God gave rules and regulations of how people are to treat each other. We understand where that came from. And I would never say that that came from evolution. That came from God. And if you're worried or concerned, as I am, about maybe some of the things that are going on in our society, you must understand that that's due to man's choices. Man's choices, not the evolution of man's conscience. A couple of other things to consider that you would have to believe if you're going to accept atheistic evolution. You'd have to accept or believe that man's ability to love, hate, etc., man's ability to feel, came out of non-living matter. Man's ability to love, hate, etc., came from non-living matter. Now, I know it looks good in a Disney movie to see some kind of non-living matter all of a sudden have a relationship. Like, for instance, there's a Disney short where two volcanoes wind up falling in love. And I know for Disney movie's sake, it looks cute and it gives, warms our heart and gives us goosebumps and all that kind of good stuff. But the truth of the matter is, two rocks aren't falling in love. It doesn't happen. Not going to happen, ever. Man's ability to love, hate, etc., man's ability to feel in general is a gift from God. To accept atheistic evolution, you'd have to believe that evolution is the true account of the origin of man. And you'd have to be okay with the fact that you can't explain how it occurred. The sharpest, smartest evolutionist out there cannot tell you how evolution started, how it occurred, where it began. They can't tell you any of those things. They just simply have to have you have, well, for lack of a better term, faith. And then you would have to believe that things are continually going from simpler to more complex states. And so the old adage, the old argument that we've sort of always made as members of the church concerning this, we've always said, well, if that's the case, if everything is continually going from simpler to more complex, then how come there are still monkeys? Why aren't those monkeys turning into humans? I mean, if evolution's true, then why can't we find evidence all the way through? Why can't we continually find these growth patterns going from simpler to more complex? It's a really difficult argument for people to have. And we certainly don't bring these things up to be hostile. We're certainly not trying to do that. We're just trying to make everyone that listens to this aware that, look, let's have the conversation. Let's quit running from the conversation and let's quit belittling one another. Let's just sit down and have a conversation about it. And let's see from a logical, rational explanation, how are you going to explain how the world got here? Atheistic evolution, I just cannot accept. It's not personal. Just simply cannot accept it. It doesn't work for me. And it really doesn't work for anyone, if we're just going to be honest. Because there's some things you have to accept that I just can't believe. The second one is an attempt by man to sort of use the old cliche to have their cake and eat it too. There's something called theistic evolution. And that is to say that God created everything, but he did it by means of evolution. You see, so here's sort of the puzzle piece. This is the way it works. For those who really don't want to fully accept God, because to fully accept God means that I have to obey him, and I'm just not okay with that. But I do lean towards God creating everything. Well, this is their loophole. They say, well, okay, how about this? God wound it up like a little crank up toy, and then he turned it loose, and evolution took over and made everything from there. I have to reject this for many of the same reasons that I reject atheistic evolution, but you also have to reject it because you just simply can't believe in God and evolution at the same time. Now, very quickly here, let me say something. I am not here to tell you that adaptation does not take place. That absolutely exists. The idea of adaptation takes place in nature all of the time. And what I mean by that is this. Animals adapt their behavior to increase their survival rate. Human beings do much of the same thing. We adapt ourselves, we adapt our living style, as it were, to increase our survival rate. Adaptation happens all of the time. Nature, it's there. Adaptation, the idea of perhaps changing the way one operates to better, more efficiently, more effectively survive, that happens all the time. But evolution, no, you can't buy that and God at the same time. No. So in consideration of theistic evolution, I have to recognize the following. First of all, evolution teaches everything came about as a result of slow change. I mean, you really have to understand that evolution needs you to believe in the snail's pace for everything. Everything came about as a result of slow, very slow change. The Bible teaches things were created by God and they were perfect, mature, and complete. Evolution, secondarily, teaches that different kinds brought forth different kinds. I mean, otherwise, how do you explain different animal groups, different animal families, different plant families? I mean, how do you explain all of that if you can't go back and say, well, at some point, something that was A brought forth B. So evolution teaches that different kinds brought forth different kinds. The Bible that teaches that everything brought forth after its own kind. The Bible specifically states that. Evolution teaches, thirdly, that man evolved from low spiritual level to a higher one. The Bible teaches that man was created on a high level and fell. Now, if you believe in theistic evolution, you're going to have to accept those things that are there on your screen that say evolution teaches, and I'm just telling you that's going to be a really hard thing for you to stomach as time goes on. Because truthfully, we just don't see it as happening or possible to happen that way. So that leaves us with the answer to our question, creation? Yes, creation. Creation. God created man and the universe. I believe in creation. Because number one, I know God exists. We've covered briefly, very briefly, the cosmological, the teleological, and the moral arguments for God. I know God exists. I absolutely 100% without a doubt know that God exists. And therefore, number two, I know the Bible is the Word of God. We didn't have time today to get into this. Hopefully at some point we will. But there is internal evidence that the Bible is the Word of God. And there's external evidence that the Bible is the Word of God. I encourage you, do some homework. Go and research the internal and external evidence for the Bible being the Word of God. So if I know that God exists, I know the Bible is the Word of God, then thirdly, I can know beyond a shadow of a doubt that the Bible teaches that God created man in the universe, and therefore I can know for sure, for absolute certain, that creation is the way that this world came into existence, this universe came into existence, and it's the way that you and I came into existence. I hope that this has been helpful to you. I hope certainly it's been an encouragement to you to focus on some of these evidences and some of these things about the creation of the world. Obviously, this is not an exhaustive study. We could spend weeks on some of these topics by themselves, but what we're trying to do is just sort of give you a little taste of what's out there, a little taste of the information that you can find, and I encourage you to do so, because it's going to be important when you have conversations with people that you have the ability to give them a honest, supported, backed up, proven argument. Something that can defend your faith, not in a hostile, I have my beliefs, you have your beliefs, and we're going to leave this conversation and neither one of us are going to be any closer together. Not in that sort of way, but with respectfulness, with kindness, with gentleness, with love. You're going to speak to people and you're going to be able to convince them. You're going to be able to convince them to have the conversation with you concerning their beliefs and their faith because of the evidence that you can present. And that's what we're trying to do. That's how we're trying desperately to train ourselves. We're trying to train you so that when you come into contact with people and you're able to have conversations with them, you don't have to shy away from those conversations. You don't have to run from those conversations. You have the evidence, you have the proof, and you can carry on those conversations with people. I hope that you have a wonderful evening. We look forward to our Zoom meeting tomorrow night. If you have not received the email concerning that, please reach out to me today, and we'll get that taken care of as soon as possible. But looking forward to that tomorrow night at 6:30. Hopefully you will join us, be a part of that Zoom. We can talk through some things, and then hopefully, Lord willing, Wednesday night we'll actually do our Bible class via Zoom on Wednesday night at 6:30. So tomorrow night at 6:30, make sure you're a part of that Zoom. Be a part of that, and it'll be wonderful to see everyone, even though it's digital. We'll take what we can get at this time, and looking forward to that being a reality at some point in the future, hopefully back in the building, back with one another, in close proximity as we're used to. And hopefully that will take place sooner rather than later. But hope you have a wonderful evening. Look forward to seeing you tomorrow night.